They drove away from the curb at Newark Liberty International, leaving me and my packed bags behind. The gray SUV, the one I'd helped pick out 2 years ago, didn't even hesitate. The brake lights flashed once as they merged into the outbound traffic, then were gone. The exhaust fumes lingered, a bitter, pointless cloud in the damp August air. I stood there, Eleanor Vance, a woman who had packed her suitcase the night before with careful precision, balancing clothes for warm days and cool evenings, swimwear for a beach I now wasn't going to see. My hands were still on the handle of my largest bag, the one Robert had insisted I bring because we'd need space. Robert was my son. The hum of departing vehicles, the distant roar of jets taking off, it all faded into a dull thrumming in my ears. My smaller carry-on sat by my feet, looking somehow bewildered. I checked the time on my wrist, a habit ingrained over decades of keeping schedules, managing households, planning vacations. 9:17 a.m. Boarding was supposed to start in less than an hour. They knew that. They had driven right past the terminal entrance where they were meant to drop me, past it, and away. The weight of the bags felt sudden, heavy, dragging my shoulders down. The bright yellow luggage tag, a gift from my granddaughter, felt like a cruel joke. It had a little drawing of a sun and a palm tree she had made. A trip to the coast. A family trip. That's what they had called it. My stomach clenched, a cold, tight knot forming just below my ribs. It wasn't just the logistics, the impossible reality of being stranded. It was the quiet, deliberate nature of it. The car hadn't broken down. There hadn't been a sudden emergency. They had simply left. The sky above was a washed-out blue, hazy with city dust. People streamed past me, pulling their own luggage, heading into the automatic doors, towards their own destinations. None of them saw me, just another figure by the curb. But I wasn't just a figure. I was a woman whose family had decided, actively, in that moment, that she wasn't coming with them. The ticket was in my hand, folded into the boarding pass sleeve. Non-refundable. The hotel was booked, paid for months ago. 3 rooms for the family. For me, apparently, only 2 of those rooms would be occupied now. The air tasted metallic. I looked at my phone. No missed call, no texts, nothing. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist the moment the car pulled away. I pulled my suitcase closer, a protective gesture that felt inadequate against the vast indifference of the airport parking lanes and the indifferent people passing by. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was something else. Something colder. Something I hadn't allowed myself to name until this exact moment. Standing alone on the asphalt, the engine noise receding into silence. If you've lived through something like this, let me know where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious who else this resonates with. The immediate impulse was disbelief. It had to be a terrible misunderstanding. A wrong turn? Maybe. They'd circle back. Robert knew I needed help with the bags. I wasn't frail, not by a long shot, but navigating a busy airport curb with 50 pounds of luggage wasn't easy. My phone was still in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts. Robert. I tapped his name. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then went to voicemail. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. My daughter-in-law, Sarah. Her phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. It wasn't ringing out, it was just being ignored. My hands started to tremble. Not from cold, but from something building deep inside. Fear? Humiliation? I wasn't sure. I looked around wildly. Other families were unloading, hugging goodbyes, the usual airport chaos. Their faces were open, engaged with each other. My family's faces, the last I'd seen them, had been looking ahead, towards the road. Sarah had said something about checking the GPS one last time. Robert had just nodded, his focus already on the traffic. It had seemed normal then. A preoccupied husband and wife. Now it felt orchestrated, planned. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. My bag sat stolidly, anchors in the rising tide of panic. I saw a skycap pushing a cart nearby. For a moment, I considered asking him for help, for advice, but the words wouldn't form. What would I say? Excuse me, my family just abandoned me? It sounded absurd. I sank onto the edge of my suitcase, the cold plastic biting through my slacks. The concrete curb felt hard beneath me. This was the reality. They weren't coming back. The noise of the airport seemed to amplify. The sounds of departure and reunion pressing in on me. I felt utterly exposed, like a child left on the side of the road. But I wasn't a child. I was a grown woman, a retired accountant from suburban Summit, New Jersey. I had managed complex financial audits, navigated corporate politics, raised a son. How could I be sitting here abandoned? The trip was supposed to be a break, a chance to spend time with them, with the grandchildren who weren't in the car because they were flying later with their mother, meeting us there. Just Robert, Sarah, and me driving the first leg, a buffer, Sarah had called it, to get settled before the chaos. It felt less like a buffer now, more like a convenient way to leave me behind. I looked at the airport terminal again, the massive glass structure towering over me. It felt like a fortress I couldn't enter. The idea of going inside, of trying to figure this out, seemed insurmountable. The tickets, the luggage, the sheer weight of the situation, it was easier, for a moment, to just sit there watching the cars go by. The thought formed, sharp and clear. They did this on purpose. There was no other explanation. The numbness began to wear off, replaced by a slow burning heat in my chest. My hands had stopped trembling, replaced by a stiff resolve. I wasn't going to sit on the curb all day. I stood up, pulling my suitcase with me. It was heavy. Too heavy. I looked down the curb. Taxis were lined up. I could get a taxi, go home, retreat, bury my head and pretend it didn't happen. The house in Summit would be empty. A quiet, echoing space filled with the anticipation of a trip that wasn't going to happen. Or, I looked at the terminal doors again. The boarding pass felt significant now. Not just a piece of paper, but a contract, a destination. I had packed for this trip, prepared, looked forward to it. Robert and Sarah had been so enthusiastic, or at least had seemed to be. It will be so good for us all, Mom, Sarah had said. A real family vacation. Her smile had seemed genuine. Robert had just agreed, busy with his phone. I remembered now the slight ease in his voice when he'd confirmed the departure time. A subtle impatience. I'd dismissed it. We dismiss so much, don't we? So many small signs that add up to something undeniable. I dragged my bags towards the nearest set of doors. The automatic mechanism sensed my presence, sliding open with a soft hiss. The air inside was cooler, filled with the recycled scent of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was loud too, a constant murmur of announcements, rolling bags, muffled conversations. I found an empty check-in counter, deserted at this time of day for my airline. I needed a cart. Navigating this alone would be impossible. I found one, paid the fee, loaded my bags. The cart felt sturdy, a small comfort. It gave me something to push against, something to focus on. I looked at the departure board. My flight was listed. On time. Gates. The destination, a coastal town in North Carolina, felt impossibly far away, not just geographically, but emotionally. Could I do this? Could I walk away from the curb, away from the expectation of family, and towards a destination meant for togetherness, alone? The humiliation was a physical weight. I imagined calling a friend, explaining, the pity in their voice, the awkward questions. It was easier to just proceed, as if this was the plan all along. As if I had decided, Eleanor Vance, retired accountant, mother, grandmother, that I needed a solo trip. The lie felt better than the truth. I pushed the cart towards security, a small, determined figure in the crowd. Each step was a defiance. Each push of the cart handle was a rejection of the empty space in the SUV that had driven away. I would not go home. Not yet. The metallic detector hummed ahead. There was no turning back now. The air felt thinner here, charged with the energy of transit. My breath came a little faster. The journey had begun, just not in the way anyone intended. The ticket was still valid, the destination still existed, and I was still here. Getting through security alone with multiple bags on a cart was an ordeal. My usual method, relying on Robert or Sarah to handle half the bins, was gone. Every item had to be considered, placed carefully. Shoes off, laptop out, liquids in a plastic baggie. The impersonal efficiency of the TSA agents felt like another layer of isolation. They saw hundreds of people like me every day. I was just another passenger, struggling with her luggage. No one knew the story behind the struggle. No one cared. It was just process. Once through, I reassembled myself and my belongings slowly, methodically. The airport stretched out before me, a long concourse lined with shops and restaurants. People sat at gates, toking, reading, waiting. Families clustered together, their easy familiarity a stark contrast to my solitude. I found a bench near my gate. C1, it was already filling up. I didn't feel like sitting among them. I wheeled the cart a little further down, finding a quieter spot near a large window overlooking the tarmac. Planes taxied, engines roaring. The power of them, moving across the concrete, felt immense. I pulled out my phone again. Still no messages. It had been over an hour now. There was no scenario short of a medical emergency where they wouldn't have called. This was deliberate. The certainty of it settled deep in my bones. It wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about a relationship, years of interactions, distilled into that single act of driving away. How many times had I been left out of a decision, a conversation, a plan? How many times had I been told I wasn't needed, that they could handle it, that I should just relax? It had always been framed as care, as them looking out for me. Now I saw it differently. It was control. It was dismissal. It was a slow, steady erasure. The sun glinted off the wing of a distant plane. My reflection in the window was a pale, strained face I barely recognized. The woman who had packed for a family vacation looked lost, but another face was starting to emerge beneath the surface, one that looked tired but not defeated. The flight was called for pre-boarding. Families with young children, people needing assistance. I watched them queue up. I didn't qualify. I was capable, more capable, it seemed, than they had given me credit for. The thought of confronting Robert and Sarah when I returned filled me with exhaustion. What would I say? What could they possibly say in return? A weak apology? A manufactured excuse? It wouldn't change the fact of the curb. The cold, hard fact of being left behind. My gate was C12. The destination was North Carolina. The ticket was paid for. I looked at my watch again. Time was moving forward, whether I was ready or not. The voice over the intercom announced general boarding. My section. This was it. The point of no return for this specific trajectory. I gripped the handle of my cart. My palms were slick. This felt bigger than a vacation. It felt like a fundamental shift, a redraw of the map of my life. Walking down the jet bridge alone felt different. Every step was a conscious choice, a step away from the life I had planned, and towards one I hadn't. The plane cabin was cool and anonymous. I found my seat, window, as I always preferred. The seat next to me remained empty. It was supposed to be Sarah's. Her bag, a small carry-on I recognized, wasn't there. The space felt vast. I stowed my bag, settled into the seat. The safety demonstration played out, a familiar, monotonous script. Fasten your seatbelt. Locate the exits. Put on your oxygen mask before assisting others. Assisting others. The phrase resonated strangely. I had spent so much of my life assisting others. My husband when he was ill, my son as he grew up, his family as they built their lives. Now I was assisting only myself, and it felt right, or at least necessary. As the plane taxied towards the runway, I watched the airport building slide past. The curb where I had stood looked small from up here, insignificant. But the feeling of standing there was etched into my memory, a physical scar. The plane turned onto the runway, the engines spooling up to a deafening roar. The vibration went through the floor, up my legs, into my chest. It felt like a physical shaking off, of expectation, of obligation, of the weight of their disregard. We hurtled down the runway, faster and faster. The ground blurred. Then, with a gentle lift, we were airborne. The city spread out below, a complex tapestry of roads and buildings. I could see the park near my house in Summit, the familiar curves of the highways I drove every day. And then, we were over the clouds, the world below hidden by a vast white expanse. Up here, there was only the gentle hum of the engines, the filtered sunlight, and the quiet of my own thoughts. The anger was still there, a hard knot, but something else was surfacing, a sense of possibility. I had made a decision, under duress perhaps, but it was my decision, to be here, on this plane, heading to a place I was meant to visit with others, but going alone. The non-refundable tickets were no longer a waste. They were an investment, in myself, in my capacity to pivot, to adapt, to survive. The destination awaited, a beach town. What would I do there alone? The itinerary I'd been given felt useless. It was filled with we will and the family will. Now it was just I will. The prospect was daunting. It was also, unexpectedly, liberating. I pulled out the paperback I'd packed, one I'd been wanting to read for months, but hadn't found the time. There was time now. All the time in the world. Just for me. The flight attendant came by offering drinks. Just water, please, I said. My voice was steady. For the first time that day, I felt a fragile sense of control. Landing in North Carolina was anticlimactic. The air was warmer, humid. The airport was smaller, quieter than Newark. It felt less overwhelming. I found the baggage claim, watching the suitcases circle the carousel. Mine appeared, looking just as it had on the curb in New Jersey. I lifted it off the belt, the weight still considerable, but now manageable. I had done this myself. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Outside, taxis waited. I gave the driver the name of the hotel. The same hotel where Robert and Sarah and presumably the grandchildren would be staying. It felt strange, arriving at the same destination, but on a completely different path. The drive took about 40 minutes, through coastal plains, past salt marshes and vacation homes. The driver made small talk. I answered politely, keeping my story to myself. He didn't need to know the specifics. He just needed the address. The hotel was a large, modern building overlooking the ocean. It looked exactly like the pictures online. The lobby was bright and airy, filled with the murmur of vacationers checking in. Families. Always families. I approached the front desk. Reservation for Vance, I said. My voice level. The clerk, young woman with a friendly smile, typed on her computer. Yes, Miss Vance, she said. We have your reservation. 3 rooms. My stomach tightened again. Actually, I interrupted softly, there's been a change. The others won't be joining me. I only need 1 room. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, I see. Just the one then. Yes, just the one. She adjusted the booking. It took a few minutes. She didn't ask why. For that, I was grateful. She handed me a single key card. Room 4, Ocean View. Enjoy your stay. Thank you, I replied. The key card felt light, insignificant, but it represented everything. A destination reached, a space claimed. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor. The corridor was quiet. I found 4112. The door opened onto a room that was exactly as far clean, impersonal, a king-sized bed, a television, a balcony with a view of the ocean, the reason for the trip. It stretched out to the horizon, vast and indifferent, beautiful and powerful. I walked onto the balcony. The salt air hit me, carrying the scent of the sea. Below, people walked on the beach, children played, waves crashed against the shore. Life was happening, and I was here, alone. It wasn't what I planned. It wasn't what they planned either, not in the way they thought. They had planned to exclude me. They hadn't planned for me to show up anyway. The thought brought a strange, quiet satisfaction. My bag sat by the door. I didn't feel like unpacking yet. I just stood there, on the balcony, watching the waves. The sound was constant, rhythmic. It felt like a cleansing, a washing away of the airport, the car, the faces driving away. It was just me, the ocean, and the quiet resolve solidifying within me. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time, it was entirely mine. The first night was the hardest. The room felt too big, too quiet. The king-sized bed was vast and empty. I ordered room service, something I rarely did. Eating alone in the room felt less confronting than eating in the hotel restaurant, where families and couples filled the tables. The food was passable. I ate it slowly, watching television, trying to drown out the thoughts. But the thoughts were relentless. Why? Why had they done it? It wasn't just forgetfulness. It was calculated. The precise timing. The ignored calls. It spoke of a decision made long before that moment at the curb. A decision that involved excluding me, removing me from the picture. The memories of other incidents surfaced. Little moments I had previously brushed aside. Being the last to know about a family event. My opinion being explicitly disregarded. Being told, "Oh, Mom, you don't need to worry about that," about things that directly involved me. It had been a pattern, subtly woven into the fabric of our interactions. This act at the airport was just the loudest, most undeniable manifestation of that pattern. I had spent years minimizing their behavior, making excuses for Robert's stress, for Sarah's focus on her own family unit. It was natural, I told myself, for children to build their own lives. But this wasn't building a life. This was cutting me out of theirs. The salt air drifted in from the balcony, cool and damp. I went outside, standing in the dark, listening to the ocean. The sound was different at night, deeper, more mysterious. It felt ancient and powerful. I was just a small human standing on a balcony, wrestling with human-sized betrayals. The ocean didn't care. It just kept moving, pulling back, surging forward. Like life, you could be pulled back, knocked down, but you had to keep moving forward. The realization settled over me, quiet but firm. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let them win, whatever winning meant to them. I had the ticket. I had the hotel room. And I had myself. That was enough. Maybe it was more than enough. The air outside felt cleaner. I took a deep breath. This trip was no longer about a family vacation. It was about reclaiming ground. My own ground. The ground that had been steadily eroding under the weight of their disregard. I wouldn't spend the next few days hiding in the hotel room. I would go out. I would see the sights. I would do the things I wanted to do, not the things the family itinerary dictated. My own itinerary. The thought felt empowering. It was a small flicker of defiance in the darkness. It was a start. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun was fully over the horizon. The ocean view from the balcony was spectacular. The sky was streaked with pink and orange. It was beautiful, and I saw it alone. The pang of loneliness was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of determination. I made coffee in the small machine in the room. I sat on the balcony, sipping it slowly, watching the waves, listening to the birds. There was a peace in the solitude that was unexpected. Without the need to cater to anyone else's schedule, preferences, or moods, the day stretched out before me, empty and full of possibility. I showered and dressed, choosing a bright blue top I hadn't worn in ages, something cheerier than my usual neutral colors. It felt like a small act of rebellion. I consulted the tourist brochures I'd picked up in the lobby. There was a historic lighthouse nearby, a nature reserve, art galleries, local markets. The family itinerary had included crowded theme park visits and designated beach time where the grandchildren could be supervised. My itinerary could be anything I wanted. I decided on the lighthouse. It involved a walk along the coast, a climb, and a view. Something concrete to do. I left the hotel, walking briskly along the sidewalk. The town was waking up, shops opening, people jogging. I walked with purpose, no longer just adrift. Finding the path to the lighthouse was easy. It wound through dunes and seagrass, the air smelling of salt and sand. The ocean was on my right, vast and unending. The sound of the waves was a constant companion. I saw couples, families, people walking dogs. They were lived their lives, and I was living mine. Alone, but not invisible. Not anymore. The lighthouse rose ahead, a tall, white tower against the blue sky. It felt like a symbol of endurance, of standing firm against the elements. Climbing the spiral stairs was a physical challenge, my legs burning, my breath coming fast. But I kept going, step by step. I reached the top, emerging onto the platform. The view was breathtaking. The coastline stretched for miles, the ocean a brilliant blue, the land green and gold. I stood there for a long time, feeling the wind on my face. Up here, the airport, the car, the betrayal, all felt small and distant. I was Eleanor Vance, standing on top of a lighthouse, looking out at the world. I hadn't need anyone to get me here. I had done it myself. The thought resonated deep within me. I was capable. I was strong. The anger hadn't vanished, but it was different now. Less hurt, more resolved. It was fueling me, giving me a quiet strength. I knew I couldn't stay up here forever, but the feeling of accomplishment, of having reached this point under my own power, was something I could carry back down with me. This trip wasn't a failure. It was a transformation, a reclaiming, and it was only just beginning. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Mornings on the balcony with coffee, watching the sunrise, exploring a different part of the town each day. The nature reserve, where I walked quiet trails and saw egrets in the marsh. The art galleries, where I spent hours looking at paintings. allowing myself to feel whatever they evoked. The lull market, where I bought fresh fruit and spoke briefly with the vendors. I ate dinner in different restaurants, finding quiet corners where I could observe without feeling observed. I read my book. I walked on the beach as the sun set, the sky turning fiery colors. I saw families on the beach, laughing, playing. The ache was still there sometimes, a sharp reminder of what this trip was supposed to be. But it was less frequent, replaced by a quiet contentment. I wasn't lonely, not in the way I had feared. Solitude was different from loneliness. Solitude was a choice, a state of being. Loneliness was a state of mind, often imposed by others. I was choosing solitude. And in that solitude, I was finding myself again. The woman who wasn't just a mother or grandmother or wife, but a person with her own interests, her own pace, her own thoughts. I had been so focused on fitting into their lives, on being the compliant, helpful parent and grandparent, that I had lost sight of my own. The airport incident, as cruel and humiliating as it was, had forced me to stop, to see clearly, to realize that their definition of my place in their lives was not one I had to accept. I could define it myself. I could define me myself. I thought about Robert and Sarah. Had they arrived? Were they at the hotel? I hadn't seen them. I hadn't sought them out. They hadn't contacted me, not once, since the moment they drove away. That silence spoke volumes. It confirmed everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse. It was a statement. And my presence here, alone but resolute, was my answer. I wasn't running away. I was stepping into my own space. My cell phone sat on the bedside table. It remained silent. No calls. No texts. It was a tangible representation of their ongoing silence, and my growing independence from it. The ocean outside was a constant, powerful presence. Its rhythm became my rhythm. The pull and swell of the tide, the endless horizon. It put human pettiness into perspective. My life, my value, wasn't dependent on whether they remembered to pick me up at the curb. It was inherent. It was mine. The realization wasn't dramatic, but it was deep. It felt like solid ground beneath my feet after years of shifting sands. This quiet solo journey was building something within me. Something resilient. Something unbreakable. On the fifth day, the major shift occurred. It wasn't a single dramatic event, but a convergence of small things that solidified my resolve. I was sitting at a small cafe, eating lunch, when my phone finally pinged with a message. It was from Sarah. Not a call, not an apology, just a text. Mom, are you here? Where are you? No mention of the airport. No explanation. Just a casual inquiry, as if I might have just been delayed. The casualness of it was more infuriating than outright anger. It was as if my entire experience, my abandonment, was just an inconvenience, a minor glitch in their vacation plan. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What to say? The old me would have replied immediately, perhaps with a carefully worded sentence that hinted at her hurt, hoping for an apology, an explanation. The new me felt a cold, hard certainty. This required more than a text reply, it required a boundary. I didn't reply immediately. I finished my lunch, savoring the taste of the fresh seafood. I wiped back to the hotel slowly, deliberately. Once in my room, I sat on the balcony, looking out at the ocean. I thought about the years of trying to please them, of trying to fit into the box they seemed to have built for me. The box of the quiet, accommodating mother and grandmother. I thought about the financial help I had provided over the years, the emotional support, the countless hours of childcare and errands. It had all been given freely, out of love. But it had also, perhaps, allowed them to take me for granted, allowed them to forget that I was an individual, with my own needs, my own dignity. The time for quiet acquiescence was over. This wasn't about it was about respect, self-respect. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to send a text or an email explaining my feelings that would invite argument, deflection, more of the same, dismissive behavior. I needed a different approach. I needed to establish my boundaries in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. I began drafting a letter, not an emotional plea, but a statement of facts, calmly delivered. The date, the time, the location of their departure from the airport curb, the lack of contact since. and my current location. I stated clearly and concisely that their actions had fundamentally changed my perception of our relationship. That trust had been broken, that I would be reassessing how we moved forward. There was no blame, no anger, just the cold, hard truth of what had happened and its consequences. I wrote about the non refundable tickets, the paid hotel room, not as a complaint, but as evidence of my commitment to a shared plan they had unilaterally abandoned. I outlined, briefly, my intentions upon my return to establish clearer boundaries, to expect mutual respect, and to no longer be available for last minute requests or taken for granted assistance. It was difficult to write, my fingers shaking at times. But with each sentence, a sense of power grew. This wasn't the passive aggressive hinting I had sometimes resorted to in the past. This was direct. This was firm. This was me speaking my truth, not seeking their validation, but stating my position. I saved the document. I wouldn't send it yet. But the act of writing it, of putting it into words, felt like drawing a line in the sand. The tide of their expectations could no longer wash over me unchecked. This was my line, and I would stand by it. The quiet power of that realization was profound. The vacation had begun with betrayal. Now it had become a delirium. My declaration. The days that followed felt different. The sense of quiet determination had replaced the initial shock and hurt. I continued my routine of exploring the town, but with a newfound sense of purpose. I wasn't just occupying my time, I was inhabiting it. I visited the aquarium, watched the fish glide through the water, silent and serene. I walked on the pier, observing the fishermen, the families with ice cream cones. Their lives intersected with mine for a moment, then diverged. I was an observer, but also a participant in my own experience. I didn't avoid the hotel common areas, but I didn't linger either. I went to the hotel pool one afternoon, swam laps slowly, methodically. The water felt cool and clean. It felt good to move my body, to focus on the physical sensation of swimming. I saw families at the pool, heard children's laughter. It didn't stab as sharply as it had before. It was just noise, background noise to the quiet narrative I was constructing for myself. My cell phone remained mostly silent. There were a few more texts from Sarah, increasingly insistent. Mom, are you okay? Why aren't you answering? And then one from Robert. Sarah says you're not responding. What's going on? Still no apology. Still no explanation for the airport. Just concern for my silence, as if that were the primary issue. I felt no urge to respond. Not yet. The letter sat on my laptop, awaiting presence. It was my statement, but the timing of its delivery was mine to control. Control. That was a foreign concept in my relationship with them lately. I had ceded so much control, so gradually, that I hadn't even realized it was gone until they drove away and left me powerless on the curb. Now, I was taking it back, piece by piece. My decision to stay, my choice of activities, my refusal to immediately respond to their demands for contact, these were all small acts of reclaiming that control. I spent an evening reading on the balcony, the sound of the ocean a soothing balm. I thought about returning home. The house in Summit would be the same, but I would be different. How would I navigate the aftermath? I knew they would expect things to go back to normal. They would expect me to slot back into my designated role, but I couldn't. Not anymore. The airport had been a rupture. And ruptures change things. They couldn't be simply smoothed over. They left scars, yes, but also new pathways. Pathways I was only just beginning to explore. I wasn't sure exactly how the conversation would go or what the long-term impact would be. But I was no longer afraid of it. The fear had been replaced by a quiet certainty. I knew my worth. I knew what I deserved, and I was no longer willing to settle for less. The stars were coming out, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast dark sky. The ocean continued its endless rhythm below. I felt centered, grounded, ready. The last few days of the trip felt like a transition. I savored the remaining time by the coast, knowing that I was returning to a different kind of challenge. I revisited some favorite spots, the lighthouse, the beach at sunset. I bought a small, smooth stone from a shop near the pier, keeping it in my pocket. A tactile reminder of this time, this place, and the shift that had occurred within me. I packed my suitcase on the final evening, the same suitcase that had sat on the curb in Newark. It felt lighter now, not in weight, but in significance. It was just a suitcase, carrying clothes. It didn't carry the weight of expectation or disappointment anymore. It was just luggage for one person, going home. I went down to the hotel lobby to check out. The same friendly clerk was there. "Did you enjoy your stay, Miss Vance?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, meeting her eyes. "I did. Very much. And I meant it. It hadn't been the vacation I planned, but it had been the trip I needed." The drive back to the airport was quiet. This time, I was in the taxi. The driver, another anonymous presence. I looked out the window, watching the landscape pass. The familiar signs of travel appeared: car rental lots, airport hotels, highway exits. We arrived at the departure terminal. This time, I knew exactly where I was going. I paid the driver, thanked him, and got my bags out myself. I wheeled the cart inside, familiar now with the process. Navigating security, finding my gate, it was all routine. But the feeling was different. There was no anxiety, only quiet competence. Waiting at the gate for my flight back to Newark felt different too. I sat by myself, reading my book, comfortable in my solitude. I wasn't scanning faces, looking for familiar ones. I wasn't dreading a confrontation. I was simply waiting for my flight. My phone remained mostly quiet. Sarah had sent a final, slightly panicked text the day before, something about needing to talk. I hadn't replied. The letter was still on my laptop. I would send it when I was ready. When I was home, on my own, the flight back felt shorter. I watched the clouds, thought about the ocean, the lighthouse, thought about the letter waiting to be sent. Landing back at Newark Liberty International was surreal. The same airport, the same concourse, but I wasn't the same person. I walked through the terminal with purpose, heading to baggage claim. I retrieved my suitcase. I wheeled it towards the exit, towards the taxi stand. I could have called Robert. I could have let him pick me up, but I didn't. I got into a taxi, gave the driver my address in Summit. The drive home was familiar, past the same towns, the same highways I had driven just over a week ago, anticipating a different return. The house was quiet when I arrived. It smelled faintly of stale air. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. My bag sat by the entrance. I was home, alone, but not lonely, not defeated. The day after I returned home was a Sunday. The house was quiet. I unpacked slowly, putting clothes away, storing the suitcase. The small stone from the coastal shop sat on my bedside table, a quiet anchor. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the backyard. The trees were lush and green. Everything looked the same, but felt profoundly different. The letter was still on my laptop. I reread it. It was calm, factual, firm. It articulated the betrayal without dissolving into emotion. It laid out the new terms. I decided it was time. I attached the document to an email addressed to both Robert and Sarah. The subject line was simple: regarding the trip. I typed a short note in the body. "Please read the attached." I proofread it one last time, took a deep breath, and clicked send. There was a finality to it, a drawing of a line. The email went out into the ether, carrying the weight of my experience, my hurt, and my newfound resolve. I didn't know when they would read it or how they would react. The waiting was almost as difficult as the initial shock, but I felt a sense of release. The truth was out there. My truth. I spent the rest of the day doing small, grounding things: grocery shopping, watering the plants, organizing a closet, tasks that filled the time and required focus, keeping my mind from circling endlessly. The house, which had felt empty and quiet with anticipation before the trip, now felt simply quiet. It was my space, a space I had returned to, not in defeat, but in strength. The evening came, the phone remained silent. No immediate reaction. Perhaps they hadn't seen the email yet, or perhaps they were formulating a response, or perhaps they were simply processing. Their silence, which had been a weapon before, now felt less powerful. It couldn't reach me in the same way. I was behind my line. The night was calm. I slept in my own bed, in my own house. I dreamed of the ocean, woke up feeling rested. The quiet battle was not over, but I had found my footing. I had been left at the airport, abandoned, but I had taken the trip anyway, and in taking it alone, I had found my way back to myself. The journey home wasn't just geographical. It was a return to the core of who I was, stripped of expectations and obligations, standing on my own ground, finally and irrevocably free. The dignity I thought I had lost on that curb was not gone. It had simply been waiting for me to reclaim it. And I had. Quietly, determinedly, alone.